everybody. So yes, I'm Danielle. I'm an entertainment editor. I have been covering TV for about a dozen years, and I feel like we're in a really special time in TV because shows like the three that we're about to talk about, they are shows that I don't know that would have made it all on the air a few years ago, let alone all at the same time. So I want to bring out the people responsible for those shows so we can get into this conversation. We're going to start with creator, showrunner, and star of A Black Lady sketch show, Robin Thede. Co-creator and showrunner of Rutherford Falls, Sierra Teller Ornelas. And creator and showrunner of As We See It, Jason Katims. I'm going to learn how to sit. I know if any of you were here for the comedy showrunner panel, we're going to do our best not to repeat the exact same thing.
I got more jokes.
So, Sierra, I want to start with you because as we're talking about powerful TV, you know, one of the things that the Television Academy is recognizing through their Television Academy Honors Program is exceptional television that impacts society through thoughtful, powerful, and innovative storytelling. But I would argue that, you know, a big part of it is also groundbreaking. And it's groundbreaking for Rutherford Falls to be the first Native American sitcom, Native writers, Native directors. So can you tell me a little bit about the process to say, I want to make this show, I've got years of credits under my belt, but is Hollywood ready for this, and what you experienced?
Sure. Before I start, Yate, Sierra Nelson She, Tabahe Nishled, Nakai Nebashishi, Twahagli Nishiche, Do Nakai Additionally. My name is Sierra Teller Ornelas. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. I'm Edgewater clan, born for the Mexican people, and thank you so much for having me here today. Yeah, we're the first in the States.
I just feel like I need to give you air horns after that every time.
That would be so great at the next chapter house meeting. Someone's like, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to tell Native stories. I've worked in television comedy for almost 12 years now, and I think we've all been really ready to tell these types of stories. In terms of them being ready, you know, I really love television, and as a staff writer working my way up, anytime there was any kind of like advice someone would give, you'd have, you know, in network television, you have upper level writers who would sell their pilots and leave and go make them, and then a lot of them wouldn't get picked up. They'd have to come back to the room, and they would just kind of post-mortem, like they wouldn't make eye contact with you, but they would just be like, I did this wrong, and I did this wrong. And everyone was trying to help them, but I was just like writing down like all the stuff that really? Like, you know, and so when I had the opportunity to meet and work with Mike Schur on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and at Helms we developed something together, when they came with this sort of half idea of Nathan Rutherford, and that I had so many ideas and stories from my life, but I'd also had like a decade of working in the industry to really know, like, oh, I know what to do here, I know what to do here, because I feel like I'd just been sort of like built up from a little tiny plant to like, you know, doing the job.
Yeah.
Now, who is this Mike Schur?
He's the sort of an unknown upstart.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you'll hear
about
him.
Maybe he'll be okay.
Yeah, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. And I mean, Jason, first of all, Jason is a 3-time television honors winner. So I think for Parenthood and Friday Night Lights. So I think we need to acknowledge that. But Jason, I mean, as we see it, because it centers characters with autism, we've seen, certainly in Parenthood, we've seen these themes to some degree. Because you had this pedigree of these other shows, do you feel like that helped you convince Hollywood that this was the right time for this show?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I really, the way that I came to the show was from such a personal place. I have a son who's on the spectrum. My son was becoming the age of the characters in the show. The characters on the show are in their 20s, they're just starting their lives, and they had, you know, along with the normal challenges of being 20s and starting your life, they had the obstacle of who they are and how they are in the world. And I was looking at my son, and I was thinking, I was wondering what his future was going to be like, and you know, and so this was a story that I was. You know, I had a professor in college who, you know, the adage about writing is write what you know. And I had a professor in college who said, write what you're learning about. And I've always remembered that. And this was the thing that was on my mind, that I was thinking about, that at times was keeping me up at night thinking about it. And so this was the story that I had to tell. And I feel like that always helps you when you're pitching. It always helps you when you want to tell a story in a way that maybe hasn't been told exactly that way before, the way that I told, in Parenthood, I did it, but I wanted to do it differently in this time. And, you go out and you pitch it, and all you need is one place to kind of, be like with you on it. Feel like, feel like they want to tell this story as well. It was a lot, the path to doing it, I will say, like, for example, casting the show authentically. The path to getting there was not a fight that I had with anybody. The show was picked up, and the first thing I said to Amazon was, I want to try to cast it authentically. And they said yes. I honestly, they were right there with me. That's different than it would have been when I did Parenthood. Yeah.
I do want to talk about casting, but I want to go back for a second because, Robin, one of the things with the Black Lady sketch show is that obviously it's sketch, so there's so many jokes peppered into sometimes 3 minutes. But then there's also so much commentary and so many things that some audience members may be learning for the first time. And I'm curious if that's something that you had to explain in those early days of the show to your executives. Like, we're really telling a story about marginalization, but we're doing it this way.
You know what's interesting? First of all, thanks for being here, guys. How you doing?
She's so much nicer than me.
Who's from Cincinnati? And where'd y'all come from? All right, so yeah, I think I just do that just to mess with Danielle. Okay, so I think that
It's fine. Keisha can come out. I'm
Keisha,
fine.
yes, my bad jokes.
Fine.
Oh my God, what kind of jokes y'all looking for? Okay, so I think for me, you know what? It wasn't intentional. So as you know, I came from late night before this, and I was in scripted before, but my path had directly come from 5 years of doing topical news, right? Dealing with Trump as president, Obama's president, then Trump as president, and then I'm just figuring out where the state of the world was going in those 5 years. So when I created the sketch show, I was like, I don't want to do anything political, overtly political, right? And I just want to have the political act be the fact that this exists. So with the sketches, I mean, we don't go into the room going, what message can we tell people with this? When the lady says, but the tilapias are fine though, right? What are we saying about the state of fish? Yeah, we're not really doing that. I think that inherently, because Black women are politicized and Black women are marginalized and Black women have a lot of opinions and Black women want to be heard, and we're creating these characters and these jokes in really authentic ways, it does end up being a political statement. So no, there was never any pushback, there was never any, but there was also, it was kind of like, HBO and I, my producers, were really in line with the fact that we wanted to make something that was unique, that was specific to Black women, but universally funny. So we don't explain any of our jokes, as everyone knows. Like, we're not like, this is why this is funny, or this is what Black women do. But I think by osmosis, as you watch the show, you inherently come away learning things that you had no idea were a thing, especially about Black women's hair, which is always kind of a subject. But I mean, even about point of view, right? And different ways people observe the world. So I think that's been one of the really cool things about it.
So, I mean, speaking to that messaging, right? Like, all of your shows inherently, as you're just talking about, like, do have some pieces that some people consider political or some sort of special message, just because we haven't been able to see these characters on TV for so long. And that's unfortunate that, like, you're put in this place of responsibility to kind of have them speak for a large population. I want to...
Sorry, I'm distracted. There are lamps with no bulbs. That is a shame. What the hell?
We don't all have HBO money. So
fair enough.
First of all, I don't want to put that responsibility on you. I am curious how you discuss that in your own writers' rooms, especially knowing press like me will write these stories about representation and everything.
We know that though, right? We know that when we're getting into it. Like, there's no reason we created these things so people would see them, you know? So I think we all bear the weight of that responsibility. I don't know. I guess it just, how do you guys deal with that?
Do you feel like there's a pressure to it?
I mean, I think existing as a Native woman in 2022 is like very political. Like just our existence and our survivance and like being able to have these platforms, I think it inherently comes with a sense of, you know, there's so much erasure in our communities that if you have this opportunity, I think whether you like it or not, you happen to be representing. I mean, there are moments where like you are the only Native person a lot of people, as far as they know, think they've seen. And so that always comes with, it's true. So, you know, so there is a responsibility I think that you have. But to me, it's about storytelling and telling great stories. And that a lot of those ideas, because I think a lot of times whenever we are even included in history, there are, you know, even like the concept of like repatriation, the fact that there are a lot of, you know, white-owned museums that took a lot of items and stole a lot of items and grave robbed, and now they're in the Smithsonian, now they're in, you know, the British Museum, and what the Native nations that want those items back. I think telling a story about how a character that you've grown to love really feels when they see those items and realize they can't have them and that they're owned by the family of their best friend, like that story, I think, helps you viscerally identify with that experience in a way that me explaining repatriation to you doesn't always work. And so I find that, you know, there's a woman, Crystal Echohawk, who runs a think tank called Illuminatives, and she did a huge study that was all data-based on non-Native awareness of Native people. And really what they found is there is no awareness because there's nothing but erasure in elementary schools and in high schools, curriculum, legislation in film and television. It was like Parks and Rec and it was mascots. And so really it's like if you have an opportunity to tell your story, I don't think you should be forced to do that. I don't think if you don't do that, you're a bad person. But I think inherently because there is nothing, any story we tell is educating people about our experiences. And that's why it's so important to have those, like you were saying, like the authenticity, those projects led by people from those communities.
Jason, do you want to add anything before I segue?
Well, I mean, I guess I had to, you talked about the responsibility, and I felt like a deep sense of responsibility when I took on the story to get it right. You know, I didn't want, in order to do that, not only was it casting authentically, we had neurodiverse voices in the writer's room, on the set, in the production office, in the editing room, all throughout the production. It was really, that was key to us, as many of our, department heads too had a very personal connection to it, because it was the kind of story where, like wardrobe and production design, this is a story about three people, neurodiverse people who are roommates in an apartment. You know, what their environment was like had to feel like it was real. It was really what it would look like. And so having those partners and telling the story is what, sort of what helped me, most in terms of trying to get it right. Because there's so many, to do a TV show, there's like a million details.
Yeah.
And you want to find partners and you want to find collaborators who are, who the story is as personal to them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that also, speaking to earlier when I said, the responsibility sometimes to represent all, because it's the only one show, like that's a lot. And I think that's what you were just talking about, and like bringing in different voices who have something in common, but all have very individualized perspectives and stories that they can then funnel into the characters, into the shows, are super important. And I'm wondering, I guess, too, about if that's an explanation, if that's something that you have to fight for today when you are staffing, or do you feel like when you, Sierra, when you said, I want, X amount of Native writers, was that a fight? Did somebody have to say to you, like, why? Like,
No.
Did you have to explain it?
No, I mean, to be honest with you, it wasn't a question in the sense that like Mike Schur said, how many writers do you want to have? And I was like, 10. He goes, well, 5 should be Native. I was like, okay, great. If there was ever any, like, if it was difficult to find them, because we had to like go into community, we had to go on Instagram, we had to like find, it wasn't something where you could just like call up, agents and managers. They had lists of people, but you had to really go in and find people. But it very much helped to just be like, Mike Schur said there have to be 5, But But at the same time, I was like so excited to like bring in all these like new writers and writers who like, you know, giving people, sometimes getting your second job is so much harder than getting your first job, and giving people that second job was really wonderful. So
But in a way, that's the most revolutionary thing.
Yeah.
What you just said is you had to go out and find them.
yeah.
Yeah.
And they're
You
not
know,
just there. Like
and-
we had to go to, you know, yeah.
Right, because now those people are on your show, but now they're part of they're storytellers who will go on to tell stories, and that's, you know what I mean. What I found like, you know, we had on our show, we hired a lot of PAs and a lot of, you know, sort of people who were just getting introduced to the business who were neurodiverse, because we wanted to give them that opportunity.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm most proud of in that show is hearing about all those people who are like, oh, they were the best people in the department, and they went on they are now like going on to other shows and working.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have had the opportunity. And so the idea that, you know, the idea that you have to go out and find them is, you know, is the revolutionary part of it. You know, it's that those people are there and they're as talented as anybody else, and it's just about now they have the opportunity.
Totally. And like my first job, I was a Disney fellow. I had never worked in television before. I would never done anything. So I remember what that felt like. So I felt like a real responsibility for these new native writers and just new writers to come in and make sure they knew, like, this is where stuff is. This is how you do this. This is like what your office is like, blah, blah, blah. And then also wanting to act as though like we're kind of raising up I'm sure you feel the same way, like the next showrunners, right? So by the time you leave this job, because I've had really great bosses like that, where they want you in editing, they want you on set, they want you at a mix, and just explaining all this stuff so that they can go and do it on the next show. To me, it's about not being the first. It's about like who's going to be the second, third, fourth. And there's so many like native shows coming. I mean, Reservation Dogs is just a revelation. And what's crazy is there's like writer crossover, there's a lot of actor crossover, and there's such range. It's such a different show, but both shows are very, very authentically native. Yeah. And I think that's like such a testament to like our storytelling abilities.
Yeah. And then Robin, I mean, I would also say for you, like, and this I think speaks to the casting as well. I mean, that you have like this bevy of the who's who in a lot of ways. Do you find that it's that the people you're bringing on the show, especially in the guest star positions, is this like a chance for them to magically get to do something they've never gotten to do before?
Absolutely.
Even though some of them have been working for decades. Like that baffles my mind. But I feel like that is a big part of how you're able to get so many people, maybe?
Yeah, 100%. It's a huge part. It's the outlet they've been looking for. Our first guest star that we booked before we ever aired was Angela Bassett. Like, we sent the sketch to her and we were like, we wrote this for you. And we don't write for a lot of people. We wrote for her, Patti LaBelle, a couple other people. But usually we just focus on character and story and we're like, this is a really good sketch, then we'll send it, and they want to do it. But Angela Bassett said, one, I was a fan of your late night show, but two, more importantly, that's not the reason why I'm really doing it. I'm doing it because you asked. No one thinks I can be funny. And I'm like, this Oscar-level actress, like this amazing, like literally one of our greatest actresses, like if you can do that, you can do 8 lines of jokes in the Bad Bitch support group. Like, and then she got nominated for an Emmy, as she should have, you know, like, yeah, I think that is a big appeal for people on the show. And it's like, even in some of the smaller parts, I think about Kelly Rowland coming in to do 1 line in our first season as well. And so we've gotten a lot of goodwill, I think, in Hollywood. I've also been in the business, although I'm very young, a very long time. And I wrote for a lot of people behind the scenes, like people in the business. You guys didn't see me on screen a lot, really, for a long time, but other people knew me behind the scenes for like 20 years. So I got to know a lot of people. I wrote for a lot of people. So I had a lot of goodwill. My Rolodex is deep in my phone. So that helped also. But I do think that they truly were just like, wow, this has never been done. Like, Black women have never had a sketch show. That's insane. Like, and what we were able to create was something that just feels like a playground, I think, for people. And it's like a half day, a day of work, you know? And then you get nominated for an Emmy.
Well,
3 of our guest stars have been nominated in 2 seasons, and who knows what's gonna happen this year? So, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. I do think that is attractive, though.
Yeah.
And in terms of hiring writers, it's the same thing. I mean, it's so funny. People now, this is a show that people steal from. So they come and they go, oh, we need a Black woman. Let's just go get one from Black Lady Sketch Show. Because our writers only write 13 weeks. So most of them are available most of the year. So they don't stay more than 1 or 2 seasons because they become much higher up. I mean, they become co-EPs and showrunners like quickly. But also what I'd like to remind people is that so much of what you guys are saying is true. Getting people's first writing job or their second writing job, that's so critical in this business. But my first writer's room first season was only 6 people, and we had 2 Emmy nominees, an Emmy winner and an Emmy nominee. So it was like all those people, they had come from The Good Place, they had come from Sam B, they had come from like all these amazing shows, but they were one of one, you know, where they were the only black woman, where they were the only woman, they were the only black person. So when they got together in that room, they were all just like, oh, okay, now we can like let all that go and like make something really great. And I think that really contributed to it. But I'd like to remind people, like, it's not that hard to find us. We're here. We are here. Every season, we get hundreds of submissions for writers. Hundreds. And they're good. It's like, I literally am so lucky what I get to choose from. But then I go out to agencies and they're like, yeah, we have like one
They're
black
not
woman.
reading hundreds.
No,
There's no way
No,
agents are reading.
they don't have hundreds of black women on their roles, on their rosters. And that is wild to me. I am at the biggest agency in town, and it's not just them. I'm not shitting on my agency alone. I'm shitting on all of them because they need more.
Yeah.
They need more, and they need them at higher levels. The Writers Guild always publishes a report every year where they're like, black people, great. Black people, people of color, women, they made big gains in staff writing positions. And then you go even to executive story editor, we're gone.
Yeah.
We're not there. Do you know how many black women showrunners there are in comedy? I'll clue you in, about 4. No, I think there's maybe 20 of us or something like actively in the business. I mean, it's a very small number considering there are 600 shows on the air. And just because you're black, also to sort of remind you, doesn't mean you have to only work on a show that's all black people.
That's the other thing.
But I have to remind people of that too. We know how to write other things. We were raised in a white American immersion system. Like, this is what this country is. Like, we know it, we get it. We can write jokes for like a lot of different people. But I do believe in authenticity, and I'm glad that more black creators and showrunners are able to, you know, do their thing. But it constantly is that thing, like, you don't have to train us all up. Right. A lot of us are here, and we've been here for decades doing the work.
And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about because, like, as we've said a few times, you know, all of you have long resumes and quality shows on these resumes. So
mostly, I've got a few that.
If you want to call them out, you're welcome to. But when someone is, let's say, getting into the business now, and maybe they have an idea for you know, a show led by a character that has been pushed to the sidelines before or never seen before on TV, and they don't have all of this goodwill in Hollywood, do you have advice for them as to like how
someone
to
who
not
wants to create
give up?
it? You said someone who wants to create a show?
Yeah, like someone who's, you know, they have these ideas for these types of shows that really can say something, can teach a lot about empathy, bring characters to the world that we haven't seen before, that we're clearly hungry for.
That are from a marginalized voice, like led.
Sure, yeah, like just
well,
across
call
the
my
board.
production company.
I
We have
mean-
a deal at Warner Brothers Television. I would love to make your stories.
Because I mean, I think it's hard when you don't have the resumes
you have to get
have.
in a room. You have to get in a room, and I don't care what kind of room it is, but you have to get in a writer's room, and you have to learn the business. I mean, I think we all have had to do that. You just got to get in there and do the work so you can be a part of the system. Writers' rooms are such a sacred, secretive place. Most people have no idea what goes on in one, except for the privileged few of us who have been in them. So I think you've got to watch people fail, like you've said, and learn from those mistakes so you don't have to learn. The worst thing to do, honestly, is sell a show having never written on a show. Really, I think that would
It's really
actually
hard
be
to
the
do.
worst thing.
I've had
to
some
do.
good bosses that did it, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also just like making stuff and putting it in front of people, and like you just constantly sharpening your skills and your tools. Like, you know, Awkward Black Girl was like a revelation, I think, for so many marginalized people.
Yeah,
and
but
just the
we
idea of-
can't use that as an example. Issa was lightning in a bottle. You know how many YouTube series are out there?
Oh no, there's a million.
Like, but I feel like we used to tell people that all
But
the time.
I feel like the market is gluttoned. But I also think though that like if you are Issa Rae and you believe you are her and you can do it, like
Yeah,
I think
do it.
having it. I also think too like
It's a good calling card too, at least when you get the meeting, right?
if you get
Even
the meeting or
yeah.
get the thing or somebody. I mean, I will say like Jana Schmieding, who plays Regan on Rutherford Falls, did comedy in New York City for many years and made a bunch of weird short films. She did this incredible video where, you know, like when unhoused people will be on like the subway and be like, hello, my name is blah, 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 and I'm here like shaking the can. she did that, but it was to ask for a date. She was like, hi, I'm Janice Meeting. I have not had a date in 5 years. I just need a man. If you have a cousin, if you have a brother, an old teacher you used to know. And she was so winning, and it was so brave. And I was like, holy fuck, who is this woman? And then she did another character about like a woman who collects like plastic bottles on the street, and it was so funny. And so like that is what tipped her over. So it was her sample, and it was getting 3 arts and, you know, having all these things. But at the end of the day, it was like those 2 videos that I was like, oh, she can also act, we should have her audition, you know? So you just never know when. I think it's like, it's very hippy dippy, but I think like putting that energy out and hoping that something kind of catches. Bobby Wilson was a writer on our show who's incredibly funny and plays Wayne, and his Instagram was just really fucking funny. And my husband was like, what are you laughing at? I was like, just fucking Bobby. And he was like, you should meet with him. He was like, you've laughed more at that Instagram than you have at all these samples I'm watching you read. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of true. And then I DM'd him, like, do you have a sample? He's like, yeah. It was like a weird play that
And he
made
was
no
ready,
sense.
yeah.
But he was like ready to go, and he was trained and had done live comedy for many years. And so I do think it's like you got to like put yourself out there.
Yeah.
And it's really hard, and you kind of have to not get bitter. You have to find a way to keep that good attitude going. And it's really hard.
Samples is real. People don't have enough samples. Like
Yeah.
people have old ass samples.
And like multiple samples that are like catered to the types of show you're trying to work on, and also that are calling
Yeah.
cards for what you're good at. So like if
And you're original, right? What's your original idea that you do want to make?
yeah, so
What is
it's
your
like
voice?
exactly. So it's like if you are a story person, there should be a lot of twists and turns in that sample. If you're a joke person, there should be like 5 or 6 jokes in the first 3 pages per page sometimes. So you want to really like get it going. And so, but you have to be really strategic, I think, in what you're trying to make. Like I had to write like a Big Bang sample. I wrote write a Big Bang Theory sample.
yeah.
I wrote so many
I
samples.
had a How I Met Your Mother. I used to shop around.
But it does, I think you just, it's a lot of kind of the repetition of it makes you stronger.
Yeah.
And I'm curious because for all of your shows, as we've talked about, I mean, like there is very important things being discussed, right? But obviously yours are comedies. You're more of a dramedy, but there's so much I think that people are more willing to listen to when there's a little bit of lightness. I mean, this might be a dumb question for you since you're coming from the comedy world, but is that something that you've had to fight through if you have a story you really want to tell and you just want to tell it straightforward?
What a dumb question. Well, I don't tell anything straightforward. Next, I don't. Yeah, I can't even answer that.
Straightforward, what do you mean?
If you were saying, I don't want to put jokes here, I want to just tell this message, or do you feel like I need sometimes the humor to tell this story?
Like vegetables snuck in the
kind
dessert.
of?
I think humor is the best way to tell the story, honestly. I don't think you have to disguise it. For me, anyway. I mean, my humor is very loud, though, so I don't know. Do you find doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of monologues. Michael Grey Eyes does a lot of these monologues on Rutherford Falls, and sometimes he just like breaks it down and just says like, hey, this is how it works. This is how it is. And we'll add jokes sometimes in there, and there'll be times where we take them out, like after the table read, we're like, actually, I don't want to be light there. I want to, like, Michael has described his character as like getting to say the things our parents had to whisper. And so there's a real kind of visceral feeling and like a rallying cry when he does sometimes these monologues about Indigenous identity. And then sometimes he's like dressing down like a lawyer and it's all jokes. And he's like,
Right.
your children's tennis instructors will feel the wrath of my power. And it's like, it's still that speech and that cadence, but it's also very funny. So you kind of go back and forth. I think if we can think of a funny way to do it, I think it's great. But there's moments where like Regan literally looks to Nathan and is like, why is your history more important than my history? You know, and I think that's like not a joke, but that's like something we really wanted to say. And I think once you introduce people to like the tonal change and they know that's what to expect, then I think you can kind of pick your spots.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because as we see it, when I went to pitch it, both the comedy people and the drama people were there because they didn't know what it was. And I sort of loved that because it's both things. And I think that you can, both things can be contained in a show. And I think to me, my favorite thing is when you find yourself laughing and almost in the same moment getting very moved by something. And I think that it's no coincidence that humor opens people up and welcomes people in. But one thing that was important for me about the humor in this show in particular, and as we see it, is that there was humor, but there were no jokes. You know, you can never. I never wanted to be laughing at these characters. It was always like the humor came from who they were and their souls. And that's where the humor came from. I wanted to sort of go back to what you were asking about before, because one of the things I want to add about telling your stories and how to do that is that, like you're asking, is it hard if you have a story that people might not want and you don't have a lot of experience in the world, in the experience yet, and you're not a known entity yet? Like, the one thing I would say about that is, like, you have to write the story that you have to write. There's no, there's no choice about that. That is the one thing I can say from doing this from my personal experience and from reading a lot of other writers, is there's nothing more clear that when somebody is writing a story that they have to write, it is better. It is the thing that pops. There's hundreds of writers. You're reading like tons of things. The thing that's going to pop is a story that somebody needed to tell. And if that story happens to be about an underserved community, about people who haven't been observed, honestly, I think it's even better. I think that's a better calling card right now, for you to get in. So I mean, my feeling is like yes, everything that you're saying is so true about like getting in a room, learning the business, doing the specs and all that stuff. But I think really the most important thing is to, if there's a story that you're needing to tell, that you're itching to tell, that then that you have to follow that.
Yeah.
I would say, though, if you're white and you're dying to tell a Native story, maybe take a beat. Like, I would, if you feel super compelled, I would maybe just think about it for like a day.
I do think that goes back to the authenticity that we were talking about.
I think it should be like your personal story and compel. I can't tell you how many people I'd be like, I knew this Ojibwe woman, and like, you have to help me make this movie. I'm like, no. So like, I do think it's like, pick your spots. Yeah. But I agree. Like, I think when you feel passionate about something.
What I meant is yes. Like, the story you have to tell is because it's your story.
Yes, I think
not
if it's
somebody else's story.
Exactly.
Yeah. Going back to the comedy aspect of things, do you feel like some of these stories need to be told through comedy in any way, because maybe that is more appealing to an audience? And when I say audience, I mean either the general public or the industry.
I think with this show, again, every show is its own thing, right? It's its own entity. With this show, I thought like comedy was so important in telling the story, because I wanted to do a show that was raw, that had raw moments. I wanted to do a show that was going to show the hardest parts of what it's like to be who these people are and the way the world sees them and doesn't see their beauties and all that stuff. And so to me, like, having the humor is a way that allows you to tell all of the story. And of course, there's so much humor that comes from life. So to me, that was like a really important thing, that because I don't come from the world of comedy, although there's a lot of comedy in all shows, in all dramas.
Yeah, I mean, it's
honest.
most
Succession
dramas.
is my favorite comedy.
Yeah, I mean, right. There's like so much comedy in so many shows that we talk about as dramas. But because I don't come from that world, it was something that I was very much like more conscious of than I would normally be.
I would also imagine it's opening people's eyes to like what they associate that community as being. Like, it also, like, I feel like similarly, like, Native communities, the first thing you don't think of is comedy. Like, my dad is Mexican American, and when he went to visit my mom's family, he was like, I've never laughed so much, and I've never seen people laugh so much. And he was like, I had no idea, like, that just was not what he expected. And I feel like there's
They just expect you to just be depressed.
Well, just because you don't know. You watch Westerns, and you watch people come out of
what
TPs.
television has given us.
Like, as kids, you get asked, were you in Dances with Wolves? No, didn't get picked. Do you live in a teepee? Like, these are our reference points. Our reference points are hundreds of years ago. And I think with a lot of this, it's like you assume trauma and you lead with that as a narrative. And I think that's why, like, adding comedy to those types of stories is like so revolutionary.
I mean, one thing I keep saying about this show is there's an 85% unemployment rate for college-educated people on the spectrum. 85% employment rate for people who are college-educated. It doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense. And now I've had the personal experience hiring people, neurodiverse people, to see that how wrong that is. And it's just like what you're saying. It's like when you don't understand a community, it's just like the importance of doing the show that you're doing and telling these kinds of stories is, you don't have to, like you said, you don't have to have a message. You're just putting it out there in a way that's real.
And
just
that's the
letting
biggest
people
message is like, oh, wow, they're just like us.
Yes,
yeah. Yeah, it is
But
true.
yeah, some
It is
people
true.
need that still.
Oh,
So-
totally. And I think, to your point too, I mean, I laugh it off and I'm like, just write poop jokes. But I mean, even on my show, there's a story within a story, right? And there's an ongoing narrative. And this season really focused on us becoming the best versions of ourselves, right? Obviously it's comedic, but it also was taken a lot from the Hippolyta episode of Lovecraft Country really affected me. And like this black woman, Ornelas, plays in this show so expertly. But that one episode of television like changed my life. It changed the way I looked at my life. She literally was like, oh, now I can just name myself. I'll say who I am. And like, as a black woman, I was like, I've spent a lot of my life being told who I am. And I was like, oh, wow, that was something I never realized, that I could actually define who I am. When, of course, I've been doing that in my life and my career, but it opened it up. And even in a comedic way, we explored that. And actually, the last like 30 seconds of the season finale in season 3 aren't that funny. They're kind of this moment where these friends are really discovering where they're going, but they don't know what's about to happen, but they know they're doing it together. So yeah, there are some moments where you just get to humanize people who have had their stories told for them, right? And that's the power of telling your own story.
And not telling it through a traumatic event, which I
Right.
think is the other spectrum, right?
Right.
Like I'm
Trauma. So much
speaking about
trauma.
comedy because we've all spent decades watching just the trauma porn. I actually want to open it up to audience questions if anybody has one. Hi, Kelly. I don't know everyone's name. Don't get
I
excited.
was like, wow, Danielle. I thought
She
you could
memorized
read your
everyone's
badge
name.
from here. And I was like, what kind of glasses are those?
Glasses today. Yeah.
We love this.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about your creative process in kind of, first page of the script. One of the hills that I will die on is that Jason Katims is like the best at introing people into the show. It's like that first 3 minutes, you know exactly where you are, you know exactly who you're going to be spending the next however many seasons with. And for me as a writer, that's always the most daunting task, is that first scene. So I just wanted to talk about, or see if you guys could talk about your creative process and how you introduce this new world to people.
Well, our scripts are no longer than 5 pages, so we have to get in there quickly.
Yeah.
So we start everything with a joke that tells something about the character's game or their conflict or their wants or their needs. But but I have a long history in scripted too. So I would just say in traditional scripted, for me, I'm always trying to find out, for the studio, they want the hook that's gonna get people to stay the 21 minutes, right? But I think as a creative, as a writer, the way I've always approached it is, how can I explain this world without explaining it? And typically that's through comedy, but what is the example of a conversation I've had? Like, I think conversations with my mother or my friends or my family that exemplify the relationship, right? Like, what are the things that exemplify it? And just trying to stay away from exposition. I think the best comedy never talks about the thing, it just shows you the thing, right? So I think it's always in those first couple of pages is showing the thing, like, and starting in the middle and having people immerse themselves in the world as if they've already known it and as if they're already a part of it. I think shows that annoy me are ones that are like, and here is so-and-so walking through the door and I'm the boss. It's like, don't do that. Like I always think about Golden Girls. They didn't start on the day when they moved in together. That wasn't the pilot. And I don't know if it originally was because they did do a flashback to it in season 1, but I like that they started and they were already roommates and I didn't know what the fuck was going on. I just knew that these characters, I knew exactly how they related to each other. I knew exactly the conflict and I knew the situation within 30 seconds. So I think that's the thing I always try to do with scripts, with longer form scripts.
Really good question. I make a playlist. So I'll pick songs of just like, this is how I want to feel, or this is how I want someone to feel when they watch it. So I'll like find songs and kind of make a playlist. And then when I write, just listen to that and only that. Go on a lot of walks and stuff in terms of like process. With Rutherford Falls, we started on Nathan. So Nathan, like a drop down talking, he's making a speech, and it's this like fiery speech about American history and his family and his legacy. It's like to a bunch of kids who don't care, you know? But it was important to us that he was like talking to children and kind of indoctrinating them, and they have to go on these tours because everyone's had to go on these school tours. And then as he takes people through this museum, he has this house that's his family's, it's filled with artifacts. It's just like abundance. And we talked a lot about his being unaware of that abundance, that him thinking all of this stuff is so important, probably isn't much. And then we switched to Regan, where she is making a fiery speech, but it's to no one in a sad casino. And she has a cultural center with like 4 items that white people immediately start touching, and she has to kick them out. And so it's played for comedy, but her first line is, you know, the history of indigenous people is the greatest story never told. And that was sort of my thesis for like the pilot. But there's also, you know, the friendship between, and so it was establishing those characters. And then at the end of the pilot, you see Terry Thomas make his monologue, which is basically like his thesis for the season. And so that's how we did it. I don't know what I'll do for the next pilot because I can't do that. But I think you want to know immediately who these people are and what they want in the most like organic way. It helped that like they were museum people, and so much about working at museums was like quickly presenting something you've said 100 times, and kind of trying to find the truth of their vulnerability in their characters, because they're kind of doing it on autopilot, what can slip out or what can be revealed. So there's a lot of like that kind of subtext within the comedy, because at the beginning of the pilot, their friendship is sort of atrophied and they don't really realize kind of how toxic it is. And then later they start to really break it down and be truthful with each other. So I always love that when people are kind of, it's a little bit of that like, waiting for Guffman, like you're saying things and you think you're really selling it and you're actually saying the opposite. And I think kind of like really listening to how people talk. So like I'll go to like grocery stores or talk to Uber drivers. I just like the way people actually, I think everyone's like really excited to express who they are weirdly. And it's just kind of finding those moments where they slip up and they actually show who they are.
You also didn't waste any time. It was first season was either first episode or second, where Jana's character is already dealing with the conundrum of the community thinking that she's selling out or whatever, that she's already living, straddled across 2 worlds. And like, you didn't stray away from that though. You know what I mean? It wasn't like,
no, but that was that was a native writers room. Like we had an idea of what we were going to do that season, and the native writers room were like, well, she has to go into community and like convince the community to like listen and talk to her. And we're like, shit, you're right. And that's also like the scariest thing to do. So we're like, that's an episode. That's a great episode. And we ended up like losing it up to do that one. But yeah, no, I think we wanted to talk about everything. And it's like, you know, thousands of years of indigenous identities and over 500 fairly recognized tribes. So it was a lot in 30 minutes. But I think it's like the truthfulness of her experience. It also helps to have multiple native characters. I think often it's like that one native character who has to speak for everyone, where it was nice. And I think like that's what I love so much about Black Lady Sketcher. Like it reminds me a lot of Kids in the Hall, where like you had like 5 people who are of similar backgrounds, but like so different and so interesting and like comedically have different voices. And I just like love that show so much because it's like an opportunity for 4 Black women to talk to each other, which in sketch comedy never happened. And it's really amazing.
to play aliens.
Right? And to do all the things you want to do.
Thank you so much. And to play men, which I always... That is reluctant, by the way. I did not get on HBO to play men.
You did this to yourself.
I did it to myself.
Anybody can play a man. You're the boss.
I know. That's true.
Just
You're
everyone
right.
has to... Okay.
You're right.
I actually want to go back because that question reminded me of something we were talking about in the beginning. And this is a little bit more... It's not just about getting into the character, but it's really about getting into the show. There was... These shows have probably been rattling around in your heads for a long time. At what point did you actually say,
Bye.
I want to start pitching them? And if you did pitch them earlier, then we've seen
Leave
them
my
make
fucking
it.
panel
I
early.
mean, I'm not letting this stop me. If you did actually pitch them earlier than we've seen them get made, can you share some of the feedback that came from why they didn't get made in the beginning? I'm curious the trajectory of, if maybe the industry wasn't ready for some of these until now.
Totally. I knew I couldn't make this show until I sold it in 2018. This is my 7th sketch show, but the first one I created, and I got to learn under 6 men who did incredible things that were on very short amount of times or never made it to air. The 6 were the ones that made it to air, and they were huge comedians. Jamie Foxx and Ted Danson, and all these David Allen Greer and all these people who I got to work with. But I got to learn from that, and I was like, wow, this is wild. No one's gonna buy this sketch show I wanna make. But I've been performing for decades with Black lady sketch groups at UCB, at Second City, at IO. And so I just wanted to stop doing it in the small stages, and I wanted to bring it to TV. So I think the timing had to be right in order for me to, like, as a performer, be somewhere in my career. I don't think if I wasn't on camera and known for what I do, that this show could have been made. And that's unfortunate because there are literally 100 other Black women who could have made this show and done it, run circles around what I do. So it's why I call it a Black lady sketch show, not the, because in my mind, I'm hoping it's just one of many. And it's just one. It's just one. It's not the. It's not the representative. Although it kind of is right now. Well, it's not though. It's not. We have like Z-Way. We have Amber Ruffin.
Right.
We have like
they're,
Sam
they're
J.
a little bit different in terms of what
different.
kinds of sketches, but
Yeah.
we're getting there.
We're getting there.
Baby steps. How about you? Were you both these stories rattling around for a long time? Pitched them before, and they didn't necessarily.
In this particular show?
Yeah.
As you say
As
it?
we see it specifically.
Well, yes, as I said, it was kind of like the idea of adult, autism in adulthood was something that I was like, well, that's, I don't see that. There's a lot about childhood, but those people grow up. But as I said before, it was because I was literally, in going through that with my son, and I was thinking about it. So I was thinking about it a lot and didn't know that it was a show. Then I saw an Israeli television show this show was based on, that was really beautiful. And when I saw it, I was like, it was a eureka moment. I was like, this is what I have to do. And had I let myself think about it logically, I would have stopped myself, because it wasn't like, 3 people in an apartment where nothing happens is not necessarily like a great pitch. Like I don't and it was very important that nothing not that nothing happens, but they don't get it. It doesn't they don't magically transform.
Right.
They don't lives don't they don't they don't get fixed. You know what I mean? It was like that was very important about the show, and I had to in the pitch it that way, because I couldn't pitch something else and then set up an expectation that wasn't going to happen. So I had to rely on this. For me, it was like I had to rely on this was something that was resonating with me so deeply that I was going to find somebody that was going to champion it. And that's kind of what I did. But it wasn't like it wasn't like, okay, I have the show, I have the pitch. It wasn't that kind of a show. It was.
And Sierra, I mean, you had said obviously that Mike and Ed kind of came with like half an idea, but I feel like you probably had ideas for a show in your culture for years. What was your experience trying to get anybody to listen to that?
No. I mean, I had a sample when I first started called Trading Posts, which was about 2 sisters running a trading post on the Navajo Nations based on like my family. And everyone would say like, oh, this is such a good sample, it'll never be made, but like great sample. And I was like, cool, and like for the first few years, I mean, people don't remember 2010, like it was rough out there in terms of representation and writer's room dynamics. And it was a huge deal to have 2 women. People were like, 2 women, can you imagine? Like, it was such a crazy time, and so
in 2010, I was in a writer's room being referred to as the girl writer.
Right.
I wasn't called
the girl
Robin.
writer. Yeah, no.
They'd be like, let's ask the girl writer what she thinks.
Yeah, and I was lucky on Happy Endings. The show creator, it was his first job in television. So he just hired the people he liked, and kind of. So there was like four women on the show, which was like unheard of. Everyone was like freaked out by it, and so that was just kind of a given. And then I will say, I think when Transparent and Pose came out, I remember looking up the demographics of like the population of trans people in the United States, and it was similar to the population of Native people. And I was like, holy shit, this could happen. Like we could actually have a show. And I got like really excited, and people were, so you just felt these sort of like cracks. And then I think watching Insecure, like watching that pilot really changed my life, because knowing Prentice and knowing the stories he was trying to make, having followed Issa Rae's career, and just being like, okay, like awkward Black girl, like this is someone who's representing a portion of community that mainstream white America never rewards, never is interested in, and is just freaking nailing it and doing like amazing work and stuff. And so I think, I worked on a show for many years and enjoyed it, but it was getting harder and harder to write in other people's voices, especially white people's voices. And so I quit and I took a break. I was gonna take a year off and I was gonna write this pilot and I was gonna and then I didn't know what it was gonna be, but I was kind of like, I need to stop writing for other people for a while and figure out what I wanna do. And then I got this call from Mike Schur at Helms, and they said like, hey, we want to do this thing. We don't totally know what it is. And they were so giving and so kind. And really like, I was like, she should be Native, she shouldn't be Asian. And there should be another character. There should be 10 Native characters. And I was like, just regurgitating, decades of working in museums. And they were like, yeah, let's do all that. Let's do that. And so I really was like at the right place at the right time. But I'm excited for like my next project. I'm developing a couple of ideas this year that are Native, and I'm really excited for like the next one.
Yeah. All right, does anyone else want to ask?
Yes. So I'm just curious, I know Robin, you have a sketch on your series where they talk about their representation and then they kind of like backfire their own representation.
Oh yeah, the market research group. Yeah.
Melissa Villaseñor did a skit recently on that show. She got a lot. Hi, I'm Melissa Villaseñor.
I do an impression of her. It's bad. Okay, go ahead. I love her.
Feedback about doing her own representation, and so she kind of like came out and was like, this is my story of where I grew up.
Oh, I don't know anything about that, but okay, all right. I just love her, but that's my only comment about that.
This is the Chola sketch? The Chola sketch? Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay.
And so I'm just curious if you guys deal with like that same kind of pushback from your communities and how you represent those characters, like especially on.
Of fucking course. Yes. Have you heard of Black Twitter? It's a real thing. Don't worry if you don't know how to find it. It's honestly a rabbit hole you don't want to go down. Yeah, of course. That's a great question. Yeah, of course. Yes, of course. When you're representing a community, even though this is why I say a Black, I'm just A, and people are like, but bitch, you are because this is the one on TV. But until there are others, yeah, you're seen as the representative, and there's a lot of pressure to represent the whole. And the truth is, there are awkward Black girls, there are cool Black girls, there's Meg the Stallion, but there's also like, sci-fi, techie Black girls. Like, so I think it is really difficult because we cannot represent, we're not a monolith and we can't represent the whole group. So while there's so much more support than not, there are people who definitely are like, this is not my cup of tea, and that's okay. Then there are people who just like, I don't like sketch, or you know what I mean? So, I mean, I think that's all of TV. But yes, I do think there's an added pressure when you are representing a group of people who have not traditionally been represented. And when you're the first to do something, it's tough. It's tough. I think the only way to combat that is to know that it's your job to hire as many different types of people as you can. And I'm very, very committed to doing that. And we continue to do so on the show. And that's the only way I can try and do it, is just to keep the POV wider and wider and invite different voices. And I'm excited for season 4. We have some new really exciting writers coming to add to our vets, and that's all you can do. But it is tough. It is tough. And the burden of that, right? Like, you're already making television in a pandemic. You're already making television as a woman of color. You're already making television in sketch. Like, for me specifically, it's a very, like, thin needle to thread. So to do that and to do that successfully is really difficult. So I just have to remind my cast, my writers, my crew that, like, what we are doing is unprecedented. So if they ever get any negative feedback, which again, 99% of it is very, very positive, but it's always that 1% that hurts. And you don't want to harm your community in any way. So yeah, you have to really think about it. And we talk about it in the room. It's like, well, for us, this is the last thing I'll say, is that even for like how we represent Black men, right? Like even when I am playing men or whatever, I want to be really careful that the swath of Black men on the show are not portrayed as like fuckboys or like raggedy or whatever, because although it's funny to play Chris on the show, every black man can't be represented that way, because that's not the message we're trying to send. We're not trying to say that. Like, we definitely don't want to harm anyone else in the celebration of us. So yeah, it's something we definitely think about and want to be true to.
Thank you.
The crab bucket metaphor in Rutherford Falls felt like a very vulnerable moment, and I think it kind of piggybacks off of the previous question. Like, were you really worried about putting that into the show and talking about how communities sometimes don't lift each other up, and you're keeping people or the crabs in the bucket?
You guys know what crabs in a bucket is?
Yeah.
Crab bucket's okay, yeah. So, do you know what crabs in a bucket is? Okay, so yeah, okay. So this was the thing. So crabs in a bucket is when you have a bucket of crabs, you never have to put a top on it, because once a crab crawls out, another will pull them back down. And a lot of communities of color and marginalized communities have that, where as someone rises, someone else in the community will pull them down, and it's just a product of racism and all the bad stuff. And so when we were in the room, it was a concept that the writers of color and the Native writers would talk about, and Mike sure didn't know what crabs in a bucket was. And he was like, what is that? And we're trying to explain it to him, because a lot of the storylines I would be explaining to Mike and Ed, and they were like, well, she's going to school to help her community, so when she goes back, she'll be welcomed. And I was like, oh no. And so she can tell everyone what to do? No, it's a nightmare. And so we were trying to explain that to them, and then we were explaining the situation, different things, and Mike was like, it's people from Boston. I was like, that's exactly it. Yes, that's what it is. But everyone had their version, and once he got it, he got it. And Ed, and multiple times there'd be situations Ed's like, is that crab in a bucket? I'm like, no, Ed, that's not crabs. It's okay, well, we'll let you know when what's happening. And so, but
I say crabs in a barrel.
Crabs in a barrel, bucket crabs, there's all these different terms for it. So what we were talking about was the love we have for our community, and also the more you ingratiate yourself in community, the more you have to be able to handle different sort of conflicts and situations, and that's part of it. There's no sort of idealized version of being a part of your community and championing it. And so we were that is an important part of her process, and overcoming that, because you have to make stuff in the face of criticism, and that's part of what this is, that it's not about denying it and the existence of it, it's about processing and going through it. And so we were nervous. I mean, we were the first on the beach, and we were very worried, and luckily people really liked the show. Indian Country had a lot of love for the show. Not everyone loved it. There was a lot of criticism about, the way that we made it, and including, white characters and this, that, and the other. But for me, I was like, what a blessing to have something to bitch about. The fact that the show even exists to complain and to criticize, I was like, yes, do it. Hold us to task, and the next one will be different, and we're gonna get more and more and more. And there's no perfect show, like you said, because we're not a monolith. But Sterling and I were talking, who showruns Reservation Dogs, and he was like, our kids have 2 Native American shows.
It's wild.
They'll never know a world in which there isn't Native television. Yeah. So we wanted to talk about it because it was a running joke of once we get dragged and we get canceled, it'll be fun when we get canceled. But in talking about it, I feel rarely people acknowledge oh my God, they really are talking about the different types of,
It's the nuance.
The nuance of being in community.
And being the accomplished one, but feeling judged by your own community when what you're doing is for your community.
Right, and I think that if you had a show about Native people made by white people, they would champion that educated Native, and they'd be the good one, and the reservation would be bad. And I think when you have Native writers in the room, it's no, those people in community have expectations, and that's rules you have to follow, and that's fire you have to go through, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's why people bonded with the show, is because we were never punching down. We were always in on the joke, like you were saying on your show, and it was important to include community and not villainize community.
Again, it's authentic. I mean, it's inspiring conversation. And I, again, want to just say they're all groundbreaking shows. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you for your questions.